In the winter of 1814, the most dangerous man in Europe was sitting on an island. He was 44 years old. He had conquered most of the known world. He had rewritten the map of Europe with his sword, and now he was pacing the shoreline of a tiny island called Elba, watching boats he couldn't board, commanding an army that didn't exist, ruling a kingdom the size of a parking lot. His name was Napoleon Bonaparte, and the man who put him there long wasn't done with him yet. Charles Maurice de Talleyrand was Napoleon's former foreign minister, a limping, cold-blooded aristocrat who had survived the French Revolution, survived Napoleon, and would go on to survive almost everything the 19th century could throw at him. He wasn't a general. He didn't command armies, he didn't shout, he didn't threaten, he baited. When Napoleon was exiled to Elba, Talleyrand warned the other European powers, "This is too close. Send him farther. Send him somewhere with no escape route." But nobody listened. So Talleyrand did something extraordinary. He stopped arguing. He stopped pushing. He went quiet. And then he built a trap so perfect, so elegant, so completely invisible that Napoleon walked into it smiling. Talleyrand whispered in the right ears. He orchestrated secret visits to Napoleon's little court on Elba. He sent messengers carrying the sweetest possible bait promises that France missed him, that the people wanted him back, that the European powers would welcome his return. He even had an Austrian general named Kohler pay Napoleon a personal visit to all, but hand him an engraved invitation to escape. Napoleon, who could never resist the roar of a crowd or the promise of glory, took the bait completely. He escaped. He marched on Paris with a tiny army. The soldiers sent to arrest him defected to his side. France erupted in celebration. The king fled. Napoleon was emperor again for exactly 100 days. Then came Waterloo. Then came St. Helena, a real island this time, in the middle of the South Atlantic Ocean, far from everything. No escape, no return, no more bait. Talleyrand never fired a single shot. He never even raised his voice. He simply created the conditions, set the honey trap, and waited for Napoleon's own ambition to destroy him. This is Law 8 of Robert Greene's 48 Laws of Power. Make other people come to you. Use bait if necessary. Now, let's break down what this law is really saying, because on the surface, it sounds passive. It sounds almost weak, like the opposite of everything we celebrate in our culture. We worship aggression. We celebrate the hunter, the go-getter, the CEO who sends 30 emails before sunrise, the entrepreneur who charges into the market, the salesperson who never stops closing. Our whole mythology of success is built around the image of a person relentlessly, aggressively, exhaustingly chasing their goal. And Robert Greene looks at all of that and says, you have mistaken aggressive action for effective action. Think about what chasing actually costs you. Every time you go to someone, you signal need. You signal that they have something you want. You hand them the psychological high ground before the conversation even begins. Every cold call you make unanswered, every pitch meeting where you're sitting across the table begging for a yes, every time you chase a client who won't return your calls, you are the one exhausting your energy. You are the one depleting your resources. You are the one running. And the person sitting still, they are watching you tire yourself out, and they are growing more powerful with every lap you run. Let me give you a modern battlefield version of this that you've probably lived through personally. You're in a negotiation. Maybe it's a salary negotiation, a business deal, a real estate transaction. Doesn't matter. You really want it. Maybe you need it, and the other side can smell that. So what happens? They slow down. They say they'll think about it. They go quiet. And you, because you're chasing, because you're anxious, because the silence feels like a no, you start making concessions. You lower your price. You offer better terms. You call back when you said you wouldn't. You apologize for following up. You just handed them everything, not because they were smarter, because they made you come to them. The Japanese Navy understood this at a cellular level in 1905. Russia had a stronger fleet, better ships, more experience on paper, but the Japanese Marshal Togo Heihachiro knew something critical. A strong army that travels 6,000 miles to fight you is not a strong army anymore. So he baited the Russian fleet. He spread false intelligence suggesting a quick, decisive victory was waiting for them. He made the Russian admirals believe that charging across the globe would end the war in one clean sweep. The Russians sailed from the Baltic Sea. They rounded the Cape of Good Hope at the southern tip of Africa. They crossed the Indian Ocean, 6,000 miles of open water, on constant combat alert, their crews exhausted, their nerves fraying, their supplies depleting. By the time they arrived at the Strait of Tsushima, they were running on fumes. The Japanese fleet had been resting, waiting, calm, fed, rested, ready. The battle lasted 2 days. The Russian Navy, one of the most powerful in the world, was annihilated. Not because the Japanese were stronger, because the Japanese were still and they made their enemy move. This is the physics of power that nobody teaches you. Energy is finite. Attention is finite. Emotional bandwidth is finite. The person who controls who moves first controls the entire board. When you force the other person to make the journey, you aren't just saving your own energy. You are fundamentally rewiring the psychological dynamics of the relationship. Let's look at this through the lens of human behavior. Daniel Kahneman and behavioral economists talk extensively about cognitive biases, but if we boil it down to its primal core, this law plays directly on the human ego and the biology of fear. Why do we chase? We chase because stillness feels like losing. Our brains are hardwired for action when we feel anxious. But think about what happens when you lay the bait and wait. You trigger a profound psychological shift in your opponent. When you run toward someone, their ego feels safe. They are the prize. Their brain releases dopamine. They feel comfortably in control. But when you stop, when you simply stand your ground, suddenly their amygdala, the threat detection center of the brain, starts firing. The silence becomes an agonizing void, and human beings cannot tolerate a void. They will rush to fill it. Their ego demands resolution. They start telling themselves a story. Why aren't they chasing me? Do they know something I don't? Are they a hidden threat? This is the classic dynamic of predator and prey. A true apex predator doesn't exhaust itself sprinting aimlessly across the savannah all day. That's a waste of finite calories. It finds the watering hole. It waits in the tall grass. It knows, with absolute certainty, that eventually the prey has to drink. Let's pull this out of the history books and drop it straight into a modern corporate battlefield. A Tuesday morning in a glass-walled boardroom. You are a manager, and you want your boss to approve a massive budget for a risky new digital strategy. What does the amateur do? The exhausted, running on fumes employee? They play the role of the beggar. They send a 5-page email at 2 a.m. They corner the director in the hallway. They create a 90-slide PowerPoint presentation. They talk fast, their voice slightly too high, defending every single metric. And what does the boss do? Their biological response kicks instantly. They lean back in their expensive leather chair. They cross their arms. By chasing them so aggressively, you have unconsciously positioned them as the absolute judge and yourself as the desperate petitioner. They will find holes in your argument simply because their ego enjoys the exercise of power. Now, what is the Law 8 approach? The Talleyrand approach. You don't push the idea, you plant the bait. During a casual project review, you mention almost as an afterthought that your biggest competitor in the market is quietly recruiting top executives for a mysterious new digital initiative. You drop a single devastating metric showing how much market share is currently up for grabs. And then you shut up. You close your folder, you pack up your laptop. You don't ask for a dime. You let their ego do the heavy lifting. You trigger their confirmation bias and their deepest professional anxiety, the fear of becoming obsolete. The boss goes back to their corner office. They stare out the window. They start obsessing over that competitor. They start imagining themselves looking foolish at the next shareholder meeting. Suddenly, they are calling you into their office. They are the ones asking, listen, what would it take for us to beat them to the punch? Do you need a budget for this? You didn't beg for the money. They handed it to you. You made them cross the ocean. And because they initiated the action, they will naturally defend the project moving forward because now it was their idea. They have to justify their own investment. But let's play a what-if scenario for a second. What if the bait isn't taken right away? Let's go back to the Mediterranean Sea. What if Napoleon, the ultimate creature of relentless forward motion, had actually learned the power of stillness? What if he had looked at Talleyrand's elegant, invisible honey trap and simply sat down on his little island? If Napoleon stays on Elba, the European coalition that defeated him eventually fractures on its own. They were already arguing bitterly in Vienna over borders and money. The new French king was making catastrophic mistakes, alienating the military and the working class. The longer Napoleon waited, the more his legend would have grown in the minds of the suffering French public. If he just exercises discipline. Eventually, France begs him to return. They send for him, but he couldn't do it. His ego wouldn't let him. His pathological need to be the glorious man of action forced him to move prematurely, walking straight into the meat grinder of Waterloo. Making people come to you requires the one trait most of us desperately lack: the discipline to sit with the extreme discomfort of silence. When you bait the trap, you must be willing to wait for the snap. If you are constantly chasing the newest trend on social media, constantly pivoting your business model to please every critic, constantly trying to force people to pay attention to you, you are the Russian fleet, exhausted, reactionary, running out of coal in the middle of the Indian Ocean. But if you build something undeniable, a formidable body of work, a sharp, unignorable voice, a deeply rooted value, you become the Japanese fleet. You anchor yourself. You let the market, the audience, and the opposition come to you. When they finally make the journey to your shores, they arrive exhausted while you are rested. They bring their energy, their resources, and their respect, and they leave their defenses behind. So, the next time you feel that familiar panic rising in your chest, the urge to send that follow-up email too soon, the urge to lower your price to save a deal, the urge to chase an argument when the other side has gone quiet, stop, breathe, set the bait, and let them cross the ocean. But here is the million-dollar question. The question that separates the grand strategists from the people who simply sit in an empty room, waiting for a phone to ring that never does. Pause. What exactly is the bait? Because let's be brutally honest. If you go quiet but have nothing of value to offer, you aren't applying the 8th law. You are just being ignored. Stillness without leverage isn't power. It's irrelevance. To make someone cross the ocean, you must offer something they cannot resist. You have to understand the deepest, darkest, most fiercely protected desires of their ego. Daniel Kahneman taught us that the fear of loss is infinitely stronger than the desire for gain. Loss aversion dictates that the psychological pain of losing $50 is twice as intense as the joy of finding it. A master of Law 8 doesn't bait the trap with something that is just nice to have. They bait the trap with something the opponent is terrified of losing: status, money, a competitive advantage, or perhaps most intoxicating of all, the illusion of control. When you give someone the illusion that they are the ones calling the shots, they will walk willingly into almost any cage. Think back to the American Gilded Age, a time of unregulated corporate warfare. Cornelius Vanderbilt, the Commodore, was the undisputed king of the railroads. He was aggressive, ruthless, and he crushed anyone in his path. He wanted control of the Erie Railroad. It was the missing piece in his massive empire. But the men running the Erie Railroad, Daniel Drew, Jay Gould, and Jim Fisk, knew they couldn't fight Vanderbilt head-on in a conventional war. Vanderbilt had more money and a bigger appetite for destruction. If they negotiated, he'd eat them alive. If they attacked aggressively, his wealth would overwhelm them. So, what did they do? They laid out the sweetest, most toxic bait imaginable. They knew Vanderbilt's ego. They knew he loved to conquer, to buy up stock, until he owned the controlling interest. He was an apex predator who loved the thrill of the hunt, so they gave him what he wanted. They illegally printed millions in new Erie shares, flooding the market completely in secret. Vanderbilt saw the stock available and his eyes lit up. He thought he was closing the trap. He bought and bought and bought. He poured his fortune into buying these shares, thinking he was destroying his rivals forever. He didn't realize until it was too late that he was buying counterfeit air. He had spent millions of dollars on worthless, illegally printed paper. Gould and Fisk didn't go to Vanderbilt. They didn't beg for a truce. They didn't fight him in the boardroom. They simply opened the door, laid a trail of financial breadcrumbs, and let Vanderbilt's own unstoppable greed pull him into a financial bloodbath. Vanderbilt, the ultimate aggressor, the man who prided himself on making others submit, had beaten himself. He exhausted his capital because his ego couldn't resist the bait. But this brings us to a terrifying question. What if you are the one being baited? How do you recognize the trap before the steel jaw snaps shut on your ankle? And more importantly, is there ever a time when Law 8 is the wrong move? Robert Greene warns us about the reversal of this law. There are moments when making the other person come to you is actually the worst strategic choice you can possibly make. Sometimes, waiting makes you a sitting duck. Facing an exceptionally cunning opponent who thrives on psychological warfare, waiting only gives them exactly what they need: time. In these rare cases, you flip the script. You don't wait. You strike so fast, so aggressively, and with such overwhelming force that they don't even have time to think. This is the strategy of the blitzkrieg. You become a hurricane. You take away their oxygen. You force them to react to you so quickly that they make fatal errors. If you sit back and wait for a master manipulator, you aren't laying a trap. You are giving them the time they need to lay theirs. You must constantly assess the landscape. Are you dealing with a hot-headed aggressor like Vanderbilt? Then lay the bait and wait. Are you dealing with a patient, calculating Talleyrand? Then perhaps you need to be the one who acts unpredictably, moving with a sudden, shocking speed that shatters their quiet planning. It all comes down to controlling the tempo. The essence of power is not about always moving fast or always moving slow. It is about being the metronome. You dictate the rhythm of the game. When you chase, you are dancing to their music. You are matching their tempo. You are living in their world. Look at your own life right now. Take a hard, honest look at the battles you are fighting. Where are you exhausting yourself? Who are you chasing? What deal, what relationship, what promotion are you running after, practically begging for validation? Every desperate text message. Every time you over-explain yourself. Every time you discount your services to win a client, you bleed power. You hand them the keys to your kingdom. You have to learn to master the void. You have to cultivate the profound, unshakable confidence required to plant your feet on the ground and say, I know what I am worth. I have built the trap. I have laid the bait. Let them do the work. Let them tire themselves out. Let their ego tell them stories in the dark. Power isn't about how loudly you can roar. It is about how comfortably you can sit in the silence, knowing that eventually everyone gets thirsty. Eventually, the prey has to come to the water. Your only job is to be the water.